The flood came fast, like betrayal. 1 minute, I was holding my baby in the living room. The next, muddy water burst through the door, dragging our world into chaos. I screamed for help, called my husband, begged him to come. He answered, but not to save us. He told me he was already safe, with her, his mistress. My voice cracked, but he'd already hung up. He left us there, to drown. That moment shattered every illusion I'd clung to. And if you've ever been abandoned by someone you trusted with your life, stay with me. I share this not for pity, but because I want you to see what healing looks like. If my journey touches you, please subscribe and like this video. You'd be surprised how many women survive heartbreak only to come out stronger. That day, I didn't just survive the flood. I began my rebirth. My baby cried against my chest. While I clawed, I held my baby tighter, feeling the cold rise past my knees. Furniture floated. Our wedding photo bobbed beside the shattered TV. The irony nearly laughable if I hadn't been so terrified. My neighbor broke through a window with a metal pipe and pulled us out. I was barefoot, soaked, and shaking, carrying everything that mattered in my arms. At the emergency shelter, I kept waiting, half hoping Chadwick would show up, maybe with apologies or shame. He never did. News spread quickly through our circles. I heard he was safe in a hotel uptown with her, dry and smug, telling everyone he had no choice. But he did, and he chose her. In those silent hours under the shelter's flickering lights, something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I was free, not yet in body, but in spirit. The woman who had begged him to come, she was gone. Reborn that very night in soaking clothes and broken trust, I smiled at my baby and whispered, "We'll be okay." Because deep down, I knew he might have left me in the flood, but I wouldn't leave myself behind again. The shelter's lights buzzed above me like a cruel joke, dim and cold, just like Chadwick's last words. Around me, families reunited. Some men returned soaked to the bone, clutching their wives and children. Others wept in gratitude. And then there was me, sitting alone on a cot with my baby, wondering how a man I once trusted with my life could vanish when it counted most. Volunteers passed out dry clothes. A woman handed me a blanket and paused, staring at my face. "He didn't come for you, did he?" she asked gently. I couldn't even answer, just shook my head. She gave me an extra blanket and a look that said she understood too well. That night, I made a vow under my breath. I'd never wait for a man to save me again. Not emotionally, not financially, not physically. I'd learn to save myself. Not for revenge, not for pride, for survival, for my child. My heartbeat slowed, my mind sharpened. The pain hadn't dulled, but it had direction now. I no longer needed Chadwick's love. I needed a future, and I would build it one step at a time, even if the road began in wet socks and silent tears. When morning came, the shelter's tin roof rattled under gusts of wind, but the rain had stopped. The mud outside had thickened into something that threatened to swallow shoes whole, but no one cared. We were alive. I stepped outside with my child and breathed in the air. It was tainted with sewage and smoke, but to me, it smelled like possibility. I had no money, no phone, and no plan, but I had clarity, and that was more than I'd had in years. When I approached the emergency desk to ask about relocation aid, I recognized a face, Lena, a woman I knew vaguely from community meetings. Her eyes widened. "Weren't you with Chadwick?" she asked, lowering her voice. I nodded. He left us in the house, took his mistress instead. Her mouth fell open. "Are you serious?" she whispered, but I didn't need to explain. The look on her face said it all. Pity, then disgust, then admiration. She motioned me behind the desk, handed me a prepaid phone, and said, "Let's get you help." That moment marked the first time in years I felt seen, not as a wife or a betrayal, but as a woman reclaiming herself. I moved into a temporary apartment 2 weeks later, small, barely furnished, and still damp with mildew from the flooding, but it was mine. I cleaned it with borrowed supplies, sang to my baby while scrubbing the walls, and made something warm out of the wreckage. At night, when the city outside quieted to sirens and wind, I'd lie on a mattress someone donated and let my mind wander, not to Chadwick, but to who I was becoming. The version of me that had begged, tolerated, and softened herself into invisibility was gone. She died in the water. Now, I was waking up. Lena checked in often, bringing groceries and hope. She invited me to local recovery meetings, places where women told stories like mine. Stories of husbands who cheated, hit, vanished. Some cried, others laughed, but all of them healed. Slowly, together. One night, after a particularly raw meeting, a woman named Celeste grabbed my hand and said, "You know what's better than revenge? Becoming someone they can't even touch anymore." Her words burrowed deep into my chest. I didn't need Chadwick to suffer. I just needed to live in a way that proved I never needed him to begin with. I applied for work 3 days after that meeting, still wearing donated clothes and with only a spare pair of shoes. My resume was outdated and my confidence shaky, but I walked into that flood recovery office with my chin up. A woman named Teresa interviewed me. She asked why I wanted the job. I told her the truth, because I know what it feels like to be left behind, and I want to make sure no one else feels that alone. She stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're hired," she said. It was a small admin role, helping sort supplies and coordinate volunteers, but to me, it was purpose. My first paycheck bought my baby new clothes and a second-hand crib. My second bought blackout curtains, so I could sleep without waking up in panic. Each small milestone felt like a brick in the foundation of my new life. I didn't need perfection. I needed peace. I started smiling again, not because life was perfect, but because I no longer felt powerless. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself, and that choice was louder than any apology Chadwick could ever offer. When I bumped into Chadwick's cousin at the grocery store, I nearly turned around and ran, but I didn't. I stood my ground. She blinked in disbelief when she saw me. "We thought you were, staying with relatives or something." I smiled. "No, I've been busy rebuilding." Her mouth opened to ask more, but I nodded politely and pushed my cart forward. Later that night, I learned she'd told Chadwick she'd seen me, and that I looked different. Stronger, she reportedly said. Apparently, it rattled him, because not long after, his number popped up on my phone. I stared at it for a long time, then let it ring out. He tried again the next day, left a voicemail about wanting to talk. I deleted it, then blocked him. The woman I used to be might have answered, might have yearned for closure, but now silence was my answer, and it was louder than screaming. I didn't need to hear why he left me in the flood. I didn't care how sorry he was now. I had a life to live, a better one, and I wouldn't waste another second on a man who considered me disposable. Weeks passed. My routine became sacred. I woke early, fed my baby, dressed in my modest work clothes, and walked to the recovery center with a thermos of coffee Lena gifted me. The mornings were cold, but they reminded me I was alive. I was rebuilding. The center buzzed with stories like mine. Silent heartbreaks, mothers stitching together futures from scraps, widows learning to smile again. I wasn't alone. That mattered more than I'd realized. At work, I earned the trust of my supervisor and was soon asked to help coordinate outreach. I began giving small talks to new shelter arrivals, reassuring them that broken beginnings didn't mean broken futures. One afternoon, while I was helping sort clothing donations, Lena approached me, her eyes wide. "You'll never believe who called the office asking for flood survivor contact info," she whispered. My breath caught. I already knew. "Chadwick." She nodded. He said he's looking for you. I didn't ask why. I didn't care. I told her to tell him I had moved on. But inside, I knew it wasn't just about rejecting him. It was about choosing to stand in the life I'd built, not the one he abandoned. And that made all the difference. He didn't stop there. A week later, he showed up outside the center. I was just finishing my shift when I saw his car, clean, expensive, out of place in our modest lot. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like it was bracing for a wave it already knew wouldn't pull it under this time. He stepped out, looking thinner, nervous. "Grace," he said. My name used to sound sweet in his mouth. Now it was just noise. I've been trying to find you. I didn't know what I was thinking that day. I panicked. He trailed off. I stared at him. "You chose her," I said plainly. "I called you from a flooded house with our baby. And you said you were already safe. With her." He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Chadwick?" I asked. His mouth moved, but no words came. Behind me, Teresa watched silently from the door. I didn't need saving. I wasn't asking him for anything. I turned away and said, "Don't come here again." His voice cracked behind me. "Grace, please." But I walked off because I had a child to raise and a life to live. He had already made his choice. That night, I held my baby longer than usual. His breath was soft against my collarbone, and I wondered how I ever let someone like Chadwick convince me I needed his love to be whole. I used to hang on his every word, his praise, his criticism, even his silence. But now, the only voice that mattered was the one inside me. It said, "Keep going." So I did. I applied for night classes at the community center, using the stipend I'd earned through the recovery program. I signed up for business basics and accounting, things I never imagined I'd touch. But something had lit inside me, and I didn't want to let it go out. The instructor, an older woman named Joan, pulled me aside one evening. "You're sharp," she said. "You ever thought about running your own thing?" I laughed then, nervously. "Like what?" "Like whatever the hell you want," she said. I hadn't known it yet, but that small sentence would plant the seed of something bigger. And as I walked home that night under the stars, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, my life wasn't just surviving anymore. It was expanding into something new. Sometimes in the middle of class, I'd catch myself glancing down at my phone. Not out of hope, but habit. There was still a part of me that was healing, that occasionally itched at the thought of what Chadwick was doing. Had she left him yet? Were they still together? Did he ever feel guilty? But I'd force my eyes back up to the whiteboard and remind myself it didn't matter. My healing wasn't dependent on his suffering. If I had to wait for his regret to feel free, I'd still be trapped. I wanted my peace to be my own. Still, I found myself getting stronger. I stopped dreaming about the flood. I stopped waking up gasping. My baby started saying little words. "Mama" came first, and that was enough fuel to keep me going for days. I created a calendar, blocking out time for work, classes, and rest. Lena called it my freedom schedule. And she was right. Every hour I poured into learning, healing, and rebuilding was another mile between me and the woman I used to be. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rising, quietly, steadily, and without permission from anyone, not even the man who once held my heart. One afternoon, Teresa handed me a flyer. "You should enter," she said, tapping the page. It was a grant contest for small recovery-based business ideas. Winners would receive startup funds and mentorship. I laughed. "Me? I just started learning Excel last week." She shook her head. "You've got the heart. That's more than most." I stared at the paper for a long time. I didn't think I was ready. But then again, I hadn't thought I was ready to survive a flood either. Or to raise a baby alone. Or to start over. And yet, here I was. That night, I stayed up writing out my application. I proposed a resource hub for single mothers, offering job training, emotional support, and emergency housing leads. I called it Second Shore, because that's what we needed after being left in the storm, a new place to land. I clicked submit just before midnight, hands trembling. Whether I won or not, it felt like I had finally said yes to something bigger than pain. A life built not on what was lost, but on what was still possible. And that hope, it felt stronger than any apology I'd ever waited for. A week later, Chadwick's mother called. Her voice was small, brittle like dry leaves. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know what he did until after." I didn't say anything. What could I say? She went on, explaining how he was a mess now, how he drank too much, barely went to work, how his mistress had left him, blaming him for everything. "He talks about you all the time," she said. "How you've changed, how you've glowed up, I guess." The phrase made me laugh out loud, bitter and amused. "Tell him to stop talking about me," I said gently, "and tell him I'm not glowing for him." She was quiet. "Would you ever consider talking to him again?" I thought of my baby, of the flood, of his silence while I screamed through the phone for help. "No," I said, "but I hope he heals, too." She sighed. "He doesn't deserve you. He never did," I replied softly. After the call, I sat for a long time, staring at the wall. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something quieter. Closure. Peace, maybe. I had no hate in my heart anymore. Just distance. And I liked it that way. One evening, while organizing donation bins at the center, I overheard 2 volunteers talking about my application. They didn't know I was nearby. "Did you see Grace's entry? That thing's gonna win. It's real." My throat tightened. I didn't need praise, but hearing that gave me a kind of quiet fuel I hadn't expected. Later that night, I whispered into the camera, recording my first ever vlog. "Hi, I'm Grace. I survived a flood, heartbreak, and the loss of everything I thought I needed. But I'm still here. And if you're watching this, maybe you're surviving something too. I just want you to know, you don't have to be perfect to rebuild, just brave enough to begin." I posted it and turned my phone face down, too scared to look at the response. But by morning, I had dozens of comments. Women thanking me, some crying, some angry on my behalf, some finally feeling like they weren't alone. That's when it hit me. I didn't just survive. I had something to say, and people wanted to hear it. That terrified me, but it also thrilled me. Maybe my new life wasn't just about healing. Maybe it was about helping others rise, too. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed Chadwick's face, his guilt, his desperation. I built walls around my heart to block out those memories, but they were always there, lurking. I had to move past him. Not just for me, but for my child. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of purpose. My plan was to focus entirely on my future, and that meant keeping my distance from the past. The flood, the betrayal, Chadwick, they were part of a chapter one no longer needed. I started planning my pitch for the grant competition. This wasn't just about winning, it was about proving to myself that I could build something meaningful. And if others believed in my idea too, even better. But I wasn't depending on anyone's validation anymore. My success would be my own. By the time the application deadline came, I had transformed my pitch into something real. I was offering more than just resources for mothers. I was offering a place to heal, to rise again. I called my project Second Shore, because that's what we all needed after the storm had passed, a new shore to land on. When I submitted my final version, I felt a sense of peace. It didn't matter if I won or lost. I had created something bigger than the hurt, and that was enough for me. As I sat back and let the thoughts settle, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I could see a path forward now, one where I didn't need to look back anymore. A week passed in a blur of work, classes, and a steady rhythm that felt like stability. My confidence began to grow again. I even started taking time to look at myself in the mirror, without the old shame creeping up. The woman looking back at me was different now. Not broken, not desperate, but someone who had survived and was building again. I'd learned to live for myself, not for someone else's approval. And yet, a part of me couldn't ignore the little nagging voice wondering what Chadwick was doing now. Was he still stuck in his misery? I realized it didn't matter. I was moving forward. And that's when I knew I was free. My life was no longer defined by his mistakes or my pain. It was my own story now, and it was just beginning. I spent more time with Lena in the following weeks. She was my rock, someone who had never judged me for my choices or my mistakes. She saw the potential in me even when I didn't. Lena, with her effortless smile and big heart, had become my closest friend. She was also a part of my healing. Her encouragement had helped me believe in myself again. One afternoon, we went out for coffee, and she looked at me with a glint in her eye. You've got this thing about you now, she said. You're more than the woman who survived. You're someone people can count on. I laughed, but deep down I was touched. For so long, I doubted my worth. But Lena was right, I had something to give. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming someone who could help others rise, too. One evening, while reading through my email, I saw it, the subject line I had been waiting for. Congratulations, you've been chosen. My heart pounded in my chest. I opened the email, scanning the words quickly. I had won the grant. My project was going to receive funding. My mind raced with the possibilities. I wanted to call everyone I knew, but I stopped myself. I wanted to savor this moment alone. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that someone believed in me, in my vision. This was my second chance, not just to survive, but to create something lasting, something meaningful. I didn't need Chadwick's approval. I didn't need anyone's validation. This was my moment, and it was all because of my determination to keep going. I had done it. My future was now in my hands. I spent the following week outlining plans for the center. I hired an accountant to help me manage the funds, and we began reaching out to local businesses for support. The response was overwhelming. People were eager to help, especially women who had walked similar paths. It was a community effort. I was no longer alone in this. My small dream was growing into something much bigger. As the days passed, I felt my confidence blooming. I no longer questioned whether I was enough. I was doing this, and it felt incredible. My focus had shifted from revenge to empowerment. Every dollar we raised, every volunteer we brought in, was a step toward my dream becoming a reality. I smiled to myself as I thought about how far I had come, from the woman who had been left in the flood to the woman who was now building something worth fighting for. Chadwick didn't call after the day he showed up at the center. I didn't expect him to. I didn't want him to. But every so often, when the silence felt a little too loud, I found myself wondering if he was thinking about me. He had to be. How could he not be? The truth was, I didn't care. His absence in my life wasn't the wound I once thought it would be. It was the scar that proved I was still here, still strong, and still moving forward. His silence was no longer a reflection of my worth. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything from him. The life I was building was mine alone. If he ever regretted what he did, that was his journey to face, not mine. And I wasn't going to wait around for him to catch up. As my project began to take shape, I realized I was no longer the person I had been before the flood. I had shed that woman's skin. And in her place was someone stronger, more determined, and filled with a new kind of hope. I was becoming a force in my own right. When I received the first donation check from a local business, I felt the weight of all my hard work pay off. It was a symbol of what I had built and of how far I had come. I looked down at the check and smiled, knowing that every dollar represented a new opportunity for someone who needed it. That was what mattered, not the pain of the past, not the man who had abandoned me, but the future I was creating. And that future was one of hope, of resilience, and of possibilities. By the time the center officially opened, I had already seen lives change. Women who had once felt alone found their place within the walls of Second Shore. I was living proof that second chances existed, not just in the abstract, but in real, tangible ways. The first day we opened our doors, I saw several familiar faces from the shelter, women who had been through hell and had come out the other side stronger. I could feel their eyes on me as I welcomed them in. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a guide, a mentor, a sister. I was proof that no matter how dark the storm, the sun would rise again. As the doors opened wider, I smiled, knowing that this was just the beginning. The weeks flew by. The center grew, and so did my confidence. We hosted workshops, therapy sessions, and career development programs, each one more successful than the last. The women who came through our doors were remarkable. They had lived through so much, yet they were determined to reclaim their lives, to take back the pieces that had been stolen from them. And I was there to help them do it. I began to realize that, in a way, I had always been preparing for this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the flood, it had all been leading me here. I wasn't just helping others, I was healing myself in the process. Every time I saw a woman take a step toward her new life, I saw a reflection of my own journey. And for the first time in years, I could say that I was truly proud of the woman I had become. Chadwick did not enter my mind as often anymore. He had become a shadow of a life I no longer wanted. I could hear the whispers of the past, but they didn't hold the same weight as before. I didn't feel the need to prove anything to him. But then, one day, out of nowhere, I received a text from him. My heart skipped a beat. He had been trying to reach me for weeks. He wanted to meet. I could almost hear his voice through the screen, filled with the same desperation that had once pulled me into his orbit. But this time, it felt different. I felt nothing. There was no longing, no anger, just a cool indifference. He was no longer the center of my universe. I was. And that truth made the decision easy. I didn't respond to Chadwick's message. It was a simple act, but it felt monumental. I knew the past was over for me. He had no place in my future. I wasn't the woman I had been when he left me behind. I was more, and he would never understand the strength it took to rebuild my life from nothing. My hands were full, building something bigger than both of us. As I set my phone down, a weight seemed to lift off my shoulders. The chains of the past had finally been broken, and I was free. It wasn't just that I didn't love him anymore. It was that I no longer needed him. My worth was never tied to his approval, and I was stronger because of it. Weeks passed without any word from Chadwick. It was as if he had disappeared entirely from my life. I kept my focus on the center, on the women who came seeking refuge and support. Every success, no matter how small, felt like a victory, one I could share with the women who trusted me to guide them. But one day, I walked into the office and saw something that stopped me in my tracks, an envelope addressed to me with no return address. My heart raced as I opened it, almost afraid of what I might find. Inside was a letter from Chadwick. His words were heartfelt, apologizing for everything he had done. He spoke of regrets, of the life he had lost, and of how he had finally realized the truth. He needed me. But the letter, despite its sincerity, didn't move me. I read it once, and then set it aside. It was too little, too late. I spent a long time thinking about the letter, about Chadwick's words. I was surprised by the lack of emotion that came with it. I had expected to feel something, maybe anger or sadness, but instead, I felt nothing. He was just a man who had made his choices, who had betrayed me, and now he was facing the consequences. His regret, no matter how real it seemed, didn't change anything. I had already moved on. I had already built something that was mine, that was powerful. I no longer cared whether he regretted losing me. I wasn't going back. My life was mine to shape, and I wasn't going to let anyone from my past dictate my future. That evening, as I sat with Lena, I told her about the letter. She listened quietly, never interrupting as I poured out my thoughts. When I finished, she just smiled and said, "You've come so far. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for." Her words felt like a balm, soothing the last remnants of doubt in my heart. I wasn't the same person who had once begged for Chadwick's love, for his approval. I was someone different, someone who had learned to love herself first. Lena was right. I had done the work. I had fought for myself. And now I was living the life I deserved. Chadwick's letter was nothing more than a reminder of how far I had come. I didn't need him to validate my success. I was already whole. The center continued to thrive. And with it, so did my sense of purpose. Each day, I grew more confident in my abilities to help others, and each success felt like another chapter in my own story of redemption. I no longer carried the weight of the past with me. Chadwick had left his mark on my life, but he was no longer the villain in my narrative. I was the hero of my story now. And as I worked tirelessly to create a better future for the women who came to me for help, I found myself at peace for the first time in years. I had risen from the wreckage. I had survived the storm. And in the end, I had won. The women who came to Second Shore were a testament to what could happen when someone believed in them. I wasn't just giving them shelter or food. I was giving them hope, the same hope I had fought so hard to regain. Some days, I would sit quietly in the office, watching the women come and go, and I would remember how I once felt, lost, hopeless, forgotten. But now I saw how far I had come. I was no longer that woman, and when I looked at the other women who had found a place at the center, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. My life wasn't defined by the past. It was defined by the present, and by the future I was creating, one step at a time. The days blurred into weeks, and I found myself more and more at peace with my choices. I wasn't waiting for any validation. I had everything I needed in the work I was doing, in the women I was helping, and in the strength I had rediscovered within myself. But one afternoon, just as I was about to leave the center, I got a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, I answered. It was Chadwick. My pulse quickened, but I remained calm. He apologized again, saying he wanted to meet and talk. But this time, I wasn't the woman who had once yearned for his presence. I had no desire to go back to the past. My life was moving forward, and there was no room for him in it. I told him I wasn't interested in talking, and without any more words, I hung up. It felt empowering to finally set that boundary. Chadwick's call lingered in my thoughts for a while, but not because I missed him. Instead, I found myself reflecting on just how far I had come. Years ago, his presence would have been the center of my world, but now I saw it for what it was, a disruption, a reminder of someone who had never been worthy of my time. He was a chapter in a book I had long closed. I looked at the women who came to the center and saw that same transformation happening in them. They, too, were letting go of the things that had held them back. They were learning to be their own heroes. And as I watched them grow, I realized how much I had grown too. This was my victory, and it wasn't about Chadwick or his regrets. As the months passed, my project continued to thrive. More women found their way to Second Shore, and I began to see a community form, one of mutual support, respect, and strength. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. I watched as women who had once been broken and unsure began to rise, to reclaim their voices, to build their futures. It was a beautiful thing to witness, and as I stood back, observing their growth, I couldn't help but feel proud. Not just of the work I was doing, but of the fact that I had made this possible. I had turned my pain into something meaningful. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. And for the first time in a long while, I felt truly content. But it wasn't just the work that kept me going. It was the people, the women I had met, the friends I had made, and the relationships I had cultivated. Lena remained my constant companion, my sounding board, and my closest friend. I knew I could always count on her to tell me the truth, no matter how hard it was. She was the one person who had never judged me, who had never tried to fix me, but who had simply been there, supporting me as I healed. I needed her, and in return, I was determined to be the friend she had always been to me. We spent hours together, talking, laughing, and sometimes just sitting in silence, knowing we didn't have to say anything for the other to understand. It was one evening, while we were talking over coffee, that Lena said something that stayed with me. "You know, you've become someone a lot of people depend on now," she said. "You've created something here. Something real. It's not just about you anymore. You're making a difference." I could feel the weight of her words settling on me. She was right. What I had started wasn't just a project. It was a movement. And it was my life's work. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for every woman who had ever been made to feel small, to feel forgotten. I was here to prove that no matter how many times life knocked us down, we could always rise again. And I would keep rising for them and for me. As I walked back to my office that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had come so far from the woman who had been betrayed, left behind, and abandoned in the flood. The woman who had been full of fear and doubt. I wasn't her anymore. I was someone else now, stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever to live a life that was truly mine. It wasn't about Chadwick or the past anymore. It was about the future. It was about the life I had built for myself, the one I was going to continue creating. And as I closed the door to the center, I knew this was only the beginning. But just as I was about to lock up, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. It was Chadwick again. He had sent me another message, this time apologizing in a way that felt even more desperate than before. He said he was sorry for everything, that he had made a terrible mistake, and that he couldn't imagine his life without me. I felt a pang of something, but it wasn't the hurt or longing I once had. It was pity. He was a man who couldn't see the gift he had in front of him, and now he was paying the price for his choices. I didn't even respond. I didn't need to. His words no longer mattered. I had my life, and it was enough. The silence that followed Chadwick's last message was deafening. There was nothing left to say, no more room for the past to creep in. I had already moved on, and as much as he wanted to pull me back, I knew that door was firmly closed. His attempts to reach me were nothing more than echoes from a time I had long since outgrown. I looked at my phone and then turned it off. I didn't need any reminders of a past that no longer held any relevance in my life. My heart wasn't cold. It was simply full of something else, something deeper and more fulfilling. I was learning to live for me, not for anyone else's approval. That was the ultimate freedom. The following week, I found myself facing a challenge that I hadn't anticipated. One of the women who had been coming to the center for a while, Maya, had made significant progress. She had gained confidence, found her voice, and was well on her way to rebuilding her life. But then, one morning, she came to me with tears in her eyes, confessing that she was thinking about going back to her abusive partner. She was scared, she said, and felt unsure of how to move forward alone. Hearing her story struck a chord with me. I remembered that fear, the fear of starting over, of being alone. It had been a part of me, too, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let her go back, not after everything she had worked for. I gave her the strength she didn't know she had. Maya's struggle was not just hers. It was a reflection of what so many women faced, the battle between the safety of the known and the uncertainty of the unknown. She wasn't alone in her fear. I had been there, too. But I had found my courage in the small moments, the ones where I made the choice to keep going, to keep building something better, even when I didn't believe I could. Maya had that same strength inside of her. I could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she spoke about her dreams. I reminded her of her own power, and together, we came up with a plan. She would stay, and she would fight for herself. And I would be there every step of the way. As the days passed, Maya began to show signs of growth. She started to engage in the programs more, to speak up more in group sessions, and to assert herself in ways she hadn't before. Watching her transform was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. It reminded me of my own journey, of how far I had come from the woman who had been trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and fear. And it reminded me of the power of community. We weren't alone. Not in this fight, not anymore. The women at the center had each other, and together, we were unstoppable. But even as I celebrated Maya's progress, I couldn't ignore the way my heart still ached for the women who didn't make it. I thought of the ones who had come and gone, the ones who hadn't found the strength to stay. I thought of the ones who had fallen back into old patterns, who had gone back to the very situations that had hurt them in the first place. It was hard to accept that not everyone would find the same healing I had. But that didn't make the work any less important. If just one woman could find her way out, if I could make even a small difference in one person's life, then all the struggles, all the sacrifices would be worth it. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my office, I thought about Chadwick once more. I realized how much I had changed. The man who had once been the center of my world was now nothing more than a fleeting thought. His presence no longer held any weight. His betrayal, his actions, they were in the past, and they had no power over me anymore. I had let go of the idea that I needed him to validate my worth. My worth had always been mine, and I had finally recognized that. I wasn't defined by what Chadwick had done to me. I was defined by what I had done for myself. The realization was freeing. It was like shedding an old skin, one that had been suffocating me for so long. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was at peace. I had done the work, both for myself and for others. And that was enough. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had built it from the ground up, piece by piece, and I would continue to build, because I knew that I was capable of anything I set my mind to, and that in itself was a power no one could take away. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that I found my strength, in the stillness where I could hear my own thoughts without the distractions of the past. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had faced the flood, and I had survived. Now I was thriving. I had rebuilt my life from the wreckage, and I wasn't looking back. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was ready to face whatever came next. My future was bright, not because of anyone else, but because of the person I had become. And for the first time in my life, I could say with certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The days began to blend together as I settled into this new life, a life of purpose and freedom. I still had moments where the memories of the past would surface, but they no longer held the power they once did. They were just that, memories, pieces of a life I had left behind. I had learned to look forward, to embrace the journey ahead, no matter how uncertain it seemed. And in that uncertainty, I found beauty. There was no longer a need to have all the answers. Life wasn't about controlling every moment. It was about living in it, being present and grateful for what I had right now. I had everything I needed. Maya's transformation continued to amaze me. It was like watching a flower bloom, each petal unfolding in its own time. She had come to us broken, unsure of her worth, but now she was a woman who stood tall. She was pursuing her dreams, confident and unafraid to take on whatever challenges came her way. It was incredible to witness. And in those moments, I was reminded of why I did this work. Not for the praise, not for the recognition, but for moments like this, when someone else's life changed because of the choices I made. I received a call from Lena one afternoon, and as always, her voice was a breath of fresh air. She had been one of my biggest supporters through everything, and even though we had different paths, I knew she would always be there for me. This time, her voice carried excitement. "I've been thinking," she said. "You've created something extraordinary here, but it's bigger than this center. You could reach so many more people, help so many more women. Have you thought about expanding?" I paused, taking in her words. Expanding? It was something I hadn't really considered, but as the idea settled in, I couldn't deny the spark it ignited within me. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to think bigger. As I mulled over the idea of expanding the center, I realized how far I had come. I remembered the woman who had once felt small, who had lived in fear of her own reflection. I wasn't her anymore. I had grown, I had found my strength, and now I had a vision that extended beyond the confines of what I had once believed was possible. The thought of reaching more women, of providing more resources, was exhilarating. But I knew that I couldn't do it alone. This was bigger than me. It was about creating a movement, a community that could ripple out and touch lives far beyond the walls of Second Shore. The more I thought about it, the more the idea took shape. I envisioned a network of centers, all united by the same mission: to empower women to reclaim their lives, to give them the tools they needed to break free from the chains that bound them. It wasn't just about helping women escape their situations. It was about helping them thrive. It was about offering them the chance to build the lives they had always deserved. I wanted to provide resources, mentorship, and support, not just in one location, but everywhere. And I realized with a clarity that I had never known before that this was my true calling. This was the work I was meant to do. I shared the idea with Lena, and her enthusiasm was infectious. She helped me start brainstorming a plan, laying out the logistics of what it would take to expand. We talked about funding, outreach, and partnerships. We discussed everything, from the practicalities to the vision behind it all. It was a massive undertaking, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like an exciting challenge, one that I was more than ready to face. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely aligned with the future ahead of me. This was what I had been waiting for. This was the opportunity to make a real, lasting impact. But even as the vision began to take shape, a part of me still hesitated. There were moments when I doubted myself. What if I wasn't ready? What if I failed? But then I thought back to the woman I had been before, so afraid, so unsure, and I realized that the fear was just a part of the journey. It wasn't something to avoid. It was something to embrace. Fear meant I was on the right path. It meant I was stepping out of my comfort zone, and that was where growth happened. So I pushed past the doubt, silencing the voice that told me I wasn't enough. I was more than enough. I had everything I needed within me. And as the plans for the expansion began to take form, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, for the women who had walked beside me, and for the chance to create something bigger than myself. I had come so far, and I knew that this was just the beginning. There were so many more lives to touch, so many more women to help, and I was ready. I was ready to take on the world, to create something that would outlive me, something that would keep changing lives long after I was gone. The day I launched the expansion plan, I felt a rush of emotions: excitement, fear, determination. It was a moment of immense change, a shift in everything I had worked for. There was no going back now. The world was watching, and I was ready to face it. The first step was finding the right partners, individuals who shared my vision and believed in what we could create together. It was daunting, but every time I met with someone who shared my passion, I was reminded that this was the right path. It was no longer just about my survival. It was about creating a lasting legacy. As the weeks passed, the plans started to come together more clearly. The paperwork was filed, the logistics were sorted out, and slowly, I began to see how this could work. But there were still obstacles. The financial side of things was more complicated than I had imagined, and there were times when the doubt crept in again. Was I really cut out for this? Was I capable of leading something on such a large scale? But then I thought of the women who had come before me, those whose stories mirrored my own. I had been in their shoes, uncertain of what was possible. I had overcome those doubts, and now I had to help others do the same. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, I found myself alone in my office. I looked at the papers scattered across my desk, the ideas I had written down, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the success that had yet to come, but for the journey that had brought me here. I had come from a place of desperation, fear, and heartache, and now I was creating something that could change the world. The journey had been difficult, but it had been worth every moment. I had found my purpose, and it was bigger than anything I could have ever imagined. As I sat back in my chair, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but think of Chadwick. I thought about how far removed he was from my life now, how irrelevant his existence had become to me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I had simply let go. In letting go of him, I had opened myself up to a life filled with possibilities. A life that I was building on my own terms. And it was in that realization that I felt the final remnants of his control over me vanish. He no longer had a hold on me, not in any way that mattered. My freedom was mine, and no one could take that away. The launch day for the new center finally arrived, and with it came a mixture of nerves and excitement. I stood in front of the crowd, looking out at the faces of the women who had been a part of this journey, and I felt a wave of pride. This wasn't just my achievement. It was ours. We had created something together, a place where women could come and heal, rebuild, and ultimately find their strength. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. It was proof that transformation was possible. As the ribbon was cut and the doors to the new center opened, I was filled with a sense of accomplishment that words could hardly capture. This was only the beginning. There was so much more work to be done, so many more women to help, and yet, in that moment, I allowed myself to savor the victory. I had built something that would last, something that would continue to impact lives for years to come. It wasn't just a center, it was a movement. The journey had been long, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had supported me, Lena, the staff, and the women who had come through the doors of the center, I realized that this was the legacy I had always dreamed of creating. A legacy not of fame or wealth, but of lasting change. I had found my purpose, and it wasn't in the approval of anyone else. It was in the knowledge that I had given others the chance to heal and rebuild, just as I had done. It was in that moment, standing there among the women I had fought so hard for, that I realized the true power of transformation. It wasn't just about escaping the past. It was about embracing the future. And for the first time in my life, I was able to look at the woman I had become and feel proud. Not because I had achieved something great, but because I had become someone who was capable of creating greatness. As the evening came to a close, I took one last look around the center, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The work wasn't finished, and it never would be, but I had done my part. I had created a place where women could come and find their strength, a place that would continue to grow and evolve as long as it was needed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I had found my purpose, and it was something no one could ever take away.